My kids, they'll never know who my father is. That's the part that hurts the most.
She was awakened by her husband screaming out her name, and he was on fire.
Revenge is based on an unsatisfied feeling within yourself. I need you to feel what I feel. And the only way that I can get you to feel what I feel is to hurt you.
You just keep hurting each other, hurting each other, hurting each other.
You have to be able to control that impulse that's inside of you. And if not, this is the result. On December 14, 2006, in Newark, Connecticut, 911 operators received a frantic call that there was a fire.
When the paramedics and police got there, they found something a little strange, something completely different from what they expected.
Rather than a house engulfed in flames, they find a man struggling to back out of the driveway.
The victim was observed operating his vehicle, trying to take himself to the hospital. He was in a lot of pain and in shock.
He was severely burned over the upper torso of his body. The police didn't understand how this man was even functioning at this point.
The burns were terrible. You know, they were from his chest all the way to his knees.
He seemed to be delirious and incoherent, but what they could clearly make out, that he said he woke up and he was on fire.
The first priority is going to be to take care of the victim and make sure the victim gets medical attention and gets to the hospital.
As first responders attend to the man, 3 other people emerge, explaining there's no active fire inside. One identifies herself as Mary Ann Langley. She says the victim is her husband, 55-year-old James Langley. The people with her are her niece and nephew, who live next door with Mary Ann's sister. All 3 are shaken, unsure of what happened, and worried about James.
James Langley was born and raised in Farmville, North Carolina. He was a typical Southern young man. He grew up riding his bike, fishing. He was one of 8 siblings.
My brother James, he was a nice guy. He was competitive. Anything he was doing, he wanted to be competitive. He and I used to do everything against each other, if you want to look at it that way, and laugh about it afterwards.
James and his brothers learned at an early age that the way to get what you want in life is to work hard.
As a child, we would get up, 5:30 in the morning, work 12 hours a day. We knew how to run any kind of machinery or tractors and animals or whatever the case may be. We could do it, We were used to working and working hard.
In the late 1960s, James's older brother, Willie, moved to Connecticut, seeking new opportunities.
My father and them, they seen how my uncle was doing, and when he was coming back with the cars and the nice clothes, and he said he wanted to leave and come live with my Uncle Willie so he can make a better life for himself.
James came from North Carolina, probably in our junior high school years. James was a country boy at heart, very likable character, full of life. We did car racing together, illegal drag strip racing, and then that plus our time in school and young ladies that we were involved in at the time, we became pretty close friends.
At 18, James got married to his high school sweetheart and went to work for the Connecticut Department of Transportation.
My father married my mother, Barbara Coleman, when she was 18. My father worked at the Department of Transportation. He started off cutting grass and getting roads ready when they were cracked up, putting the seal in the cracks. Then he moved up to be the foreman.
James had two sons. That would be James Corey Jr. and Terrence. And they were basically less than a year apart.
Unfortunately, James's dedication to work didn't leave room for much else.
He would work from sunup probably to sundown, and then, you know, his wife would be angry. He'd come home and just flop down on the living room floor to watch TV, and that would be the end of his day. And she'd be yelling around the house, you know, you're out there, you're doing too much. And he eventually got divorced after about maybe 7 or 8 years, and he moved on.
James was determined to be a great father, and he made sure his boy stayed very close to him.
Though James had been divorced once, he never gave up on love. One day, at his son's Little League game, he met Mary Ann Stokes.
Mary Ann was from the South originally. She was a kind-hearted lady. She was a churchgoer and family-oriented.
Mary Ann had a relationship. She got married, and through that marriage, she had a son named Daryl. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't work out for her. So meeting someone like James was pretty something she was ready for.
He had just gone through a divorce, and he was going through some things of his own, I guess, with being alone. You know, they just became a couple, and it worked out, and they went together for quite a while.
In 1981, Mary Ann and James decided to get married. So the blended family, her one son, his two sons, they all became one cohesive group.
Mrs. Langley really loved her husband. She loved him very much. She cooked for him. She cleaned for him. He was a diabetic, and she really took care of him.
He was a great cook, and if you went in that house, there was food within arm reach anytime you went there. They were big eaters. You know, we were country people. We all were country people, and we all cooked. So we did it big, I tell you.
Family life was going well, but James realized his hard work wasn't being recognized at the Department of Transportation.
After a number of years of being passed over for promotions, James decided to start his own landscaping and paving business in 1988.
James was extremely competitive. He wanted to win at everything he did. So when it came time for him to open up his own business, he went full force. The same way he put in that work for other people, he decided to put the work in for himself.
James enjoyed being his own boss and providing Mary Ann with a comfortable life. But most importantly, he wanted to set a good example for his sons.
He would have his children work with him. He would take them out on jobs with him, show them how it's done, so later on that they could, you know, be enterprising young men themselves.
Most of the time, he wanted us to be out there working when we was, instead of out in the street having a good time. He tried to plant a seed that you got to work for. In order to get what you want in life, you're going to have to get up and you're going to go to work and go get it.
Because the business was flourishing so well, James was able to invest in real estate properties. He had rental properties, commercial properties.
He wanted to get bigger, and he had other dreams of selling out later on to stockpile finances so that he would be comfortable.
It resulted in a quite comfortable lifestyle. By the time they had reached their late 40s, they had amassed an estate worth well over $1 million.
On December 4th, 2006, James celebrated his 55th birthday and finally started thinking about retirement.
He was rambling on about leaving and going to move, sell everything, or take the equipment and I should just move back to North Carolina. So I said, well, that's what you want to do, then let's do that. Let's just pick up and go.
Now, it seems he may never get the chance. 10 days after his birthday, James is rushed to the emergency room. While doctors struggle to stabilize James Langley at a Norwalk, Connecticut hospital, detectives speak with his wife, Mary Ann, to find out what happened.
When the investigators initially interviewed Mary Ann, she was quite distraught. Marianne said she had fell asleep in the basement and she was awakened by her husband screaming out her name.
She said that she saw the kitchen light off and the sparkling of fire.
She was terrified and unsure what to do.
She panicked and ran next door to her sister's house and began frantically banging on the door to try to get some assistance, and that's when they called the police and the ambulance.
She really did not offer any explanation as to how what happened to James could have happened.
Authorities combed the house for evidence, led by Fire Inspector John Lumba. For him, this is no ordinary investigation. He has a personal connection to the victim.
The case was very difficult for me, basically because it involved human life, and it involved a friend that I had known for many, many years. But I couldn't allow that to, sway an opinion or anything. It went strictly by evidence.
It was apparent that the fire was contained to one area of the house.
Investigators, upon looking into the master bedroom, they see that there's burn patterns on the carpet.
There were droplets of burn patterns, but it wasn't a consistent burn. It wasn't a big pattern burn. It was just droplets that had ignited at some point and it went out. And you could say they were droplets because they were very small. They looked like teardrops on the flooring.
One of the odd things was there was no fire on the bed at all. Nothing on the bed was singed or burned.
The fact that the bed itself wasn't half burnt would indicate that James was not asleep in bed when the fire occurred.
But the fire investigator found that odd because James had mentioned earlier that he woke up on fire, and they thought that how could he do that if there were no burn marks there?
The next thing you look for is the ignition source. What caused the heat buildup to create a fire? So you're looking for wiring, you're looking for a candle or something like that. James was not a smoker. There was no cigarettes, there was no lighter. Where the fire was, there was no ignition sources.
So was this an accident or something more sinister? Investigators find more clues in the kitchen.
There's matches, a pack of matches with a single burnt match on the edge of the counter.
I couldn't absolutely say that that was used to ignite because sometimes when you have a gas stove, which they did at the time, sometimes when you have a bad pilot light or a bad burner, people use a match to ignite that burner to continue their cooking.
Also found in the garbage can in the kitchen was a solid, heavy plastic cup. It was lying right on top of the garbage in the garbage can, which would indicate that it was relatively freshly put there. Also, it had a strong odor of residue gasoline in it, which is what you're smelling throughout the house. So it would kind of be indicative that that was used to transport the gasoline.
They find a similar piece of evidence left just outside the back door.
On the top of the garbage can, there was a white styrofoam coffee cup that had just, the bottom had been disintegrated. And that's what happens when you pour something with acetone, gasoline, or acid in styrofoam.
When I saw the melted cup, I kind of recognized what was going on. Gasoline will go through a styrofoam cup probably in about 30 seconds.
If someone filled the cup with gas outside, it wouldn't have lasted long.
By the time you got back to the house, you'd have basically a burnt through cup, which would explain why it was discarded.
Evidence seems to point that James Langley had been intentionally set on fire, but there was no evidence of any forced entry into the home. So the question really is, who struck the match?
The morning after a fire gravely injures James Langley, investigators still have more questions than answers. So they ask his wife, Mary Ann, to come in for another interview.
The first time they talked to her, she was very distraught. This time, she came in pretty calm.
This time, when they asked her, did she have any idea how did this all come about? She said she did.
Mary Ann began to tell them that James had been diagnosed with type 2 adult diabetes, and he wasn't really taking care of himself, according to her. He wasn't taking his meds, and that might have led to what had happened.
Why don't you start with last evening and go through again what happened? In my interview with Mary Ann Langley, she related that at around 8:30, they started slumping and also had urinated on himself, which she knew or believed to be diabetic in nature.
I said, your sugar must be up real high. I said, Langley, I said, I'm gonna take it. So I did. And I said, Langley, your sugar's 594. And then I said to him, listen, you gotta go to the hospital.
After some convincing, they decided to go. Once they arrived at the hospital, the emergency room was a little crowded, and James decided he wasn't going to get out the car. He didn't want to be involved in all the people that were there. So James insisted that Mary Ann drive him home.
He was still not doing well and had a hard time taking off his clothes.
She was very upset with him, and they argued a little more about James not taking care of himself. At that point is when she decided she was going to sleep downstairs because she just couldn't reason with the men.
Mary Ann says she fell asleep in the basement bedroom. Shortly before 5 a.m., she woke up to the sound of her husband shouting.
And I hear him screaming for me. I was screaming. I said, what? I went running. I said, what? Oh, God, when I see this bottle of the fight, I ran out the door. And I run to my sister's back door, screaming.
She didn't see the fire start, but she thinks she knows what happened.
Mary Ann said that she believes that James woke up in a disoriented stupor and probably set his cell phone fire. James had frequently come home with the smell of gasoline on his clothes from different jobs that they do. So the gasoline being on him is not too far-fetched. Because of the condition that people suffer from being in a diabetic haze when your numbers are so high, the detectives had to at least consider James setting himself on fire was a possibility.
Mary Ann says that after calling 911 from next door, she returned with her niece and nephew and found James delirious and making wild accusations.
I asked her, well, what was he saying? She basically, well, he was hallucinating, he was crazy, he didn't know what he was talking about. And when I asked her, well, what was he saying? She said, well, he said that I lit him on fire, which wasn't true.
Mary Ann couldn't believe that he accused her of something of that nature. Why would Mary Ann spend her time taking him to the hospital, arguing with him, trying to convince him to take better care of himself if she was just going to turn around and set him on fire?
He was hallucinating, you know. Are you trying to kill me? I said, what are you talking about? I was, crying and screaming, and it was terrible. It was terrible.
If somebody goes into shock, is it very possible that they're not aware of the here and now conversation and their thought patterns? Yes.
If Mary Ann had harmed James, why would she volunteer the detail of James's accusation? Investigators also ask her about the matches and cups they found.
She explained that she uses matches to light the pilot on the stove when it doesn't work automatically, and that's why that was there. The thick plastic cup, she said it was a daily use cup. Are your fingerprints going to come back on that cup?
Oh, yeah, I use the cup all the time. That cup was in the sink last night, okay? That cup.
Mary Ann said they used the styrofoam cups for their daily coffee, but she doesn't know why it would end up in the back door unless James did it.
My brother knows not to set himself on fire. I mean, it can happen, but he dealt with stuff like that every day. He dealt with diesel fuel, gasoline, all kinds of oils.
It was very difficult for me to believe that my father would go get gasoline to set himself on fire.
Only one person knows exactly what happened, and unfortunately, he's lying in a hospital room, unconscious.
He had burns, reportedly about 40% of his body, on his abdomen, backs of the arms, hands, and they were second and third degree burns, which are very serious.
When I went to the hospital to see him, they had sedated him so that he wouldn't hurt himself, because he would get delirious, you know, in his sleep from the burns and so forth and so on.
They had to take him to surgery and do the skin graft. It was maybe a 50-50, 60-40 chance that he lived, so I just could take that answer, and there was nothing I could do. And my father sitting in the hospital, going through the pain that he going through, and I might not have my father back again. So that was the hardest part.
In the days following James Langley's hospitalization, Norwalk police interview the rest of his family, starting with his niece and nephew who lived next door.
During the interviews with both of them, they reiterated what Mary Ann Langley in her interview had alluded to, which is that James was accusing her of lighting him on fire.
He says words to the effect that, "I know who did this to me. It was your aunt. She did this to me. She poured the liquid and she lit the match."
They tried to explain to him that the ambulance was already on its way and the police had been called. But he was so out of it that he just kind of ran out the door, got into the car, and tried to drive himself.
The niece and nephew's story strengthens the theory that James was delirious. James's other statement that night suggests more confusion.
He'd already indicated to the police that he woke up and he was on fire. And it's sort of hard to reconcile the fact that somebody can observe his wife pouring liquid on him and lighting a match when he was asleep.
Authorities asked the niece and nephew about the couple's relationship and get some surprising information.
James and Mary Ann had continued marital problems. In fact, it was common knowledge that James had an ongoing affair.
The affair began in 2004 when James was hired to build a wall on the property of a woman named Sylvia.
She came over to start speaking to James about it, and one thing led to another, and they became very interested in each other very quickly. She put some light back into his life that he had lost in his marriage, and the relationship quickly escalated into something romantic.
Understandably, Mary Ann was very upset when she learned of the affair.
I know that Mary Ann somehow got wind of this particular relationship, and she went in the driveway with the van, and the wall was there that he had built, and she kind of rammed the wall with the van. Things just got worse after that.
It turns out the relationship with Sylvia was just one of many affairs James had over the years, and the infidelity set off a vicious cycle in their relationship.
He wasn't happy at home, and so, you know, he ran around. He ran around and she would catch him. And every time she would catch him, you know, they go through a thing for a minute, and then they go to stay together. I did hear her rumblings, but she was upset when I come around. You know, "I'm gonna leave your father." "Okay, fine. If you're gonna leave him, okay, fine. Well, there's nothing I can do about it.
About a year before the fire, Mary Ann got fed up. She had had enough. She decided to file for divorce from James.
But within a few months of Mary Ann trying to file for divorce, She dropped the divorce proceedings, and when Marianne came back and said no, she wants to work it out with her husband.
On December 20th, 6 days after James went into the hospital, investigators interviewed James's mistress, Sylvia, to get her side of the story.
She said that James had been unhappy in his marriage for a while, and when they met, she happened to give him a safe space to come when his married life was more turmoil.
Sylvia details what she thinks started that turmoil.
She explained to the investigators that money was really the source of their marital problems.
Marianne was a kept woman, and kept women are scary because when they're put in a situation where they might lose their lifestyle, they get desperate. They just weren't happy with each other, but he was holding out, she wanted more, and it was like, money is not a big deal if you're not happy.
But there's more to Sylvia's story about Marianne.
She's a heavy gambler, too.
Because of Marianne's gambling, James decided to cut her off from the joint bank account. That led to money mysteriously ended up missing from around the house, from the office. This became a serious problem for James.
It was a repetitive cycle. One goes and does something, and the other one feels like they're going to do something to hurt the other one.
That was, I think, the final straw that made him make his decision that now was the time. I'm through with it, you know, with the relationship.
According to her, James and her felt a sense of relief when Marianne finally filed for divorce. They thought it was over, that he would be finally done with her. But then she withdrew the case, and things went back to exactly the way they were before. The reason that Marianne stayed in the marriage is because she knew she would be better off financially staying with James than leaving him.
Sylvia explains that James had gotten Marianne to sign a prenuptial agreement.
If a divorce went down, she, because of the prenuptial, wouldn't have access to the business.
Sylvia also offers another crucial piece of information, something James said less than 48 hours before he was burned.
Let me ask you this, coming into Christmas, was there any indication or pressure or anything said to him that you...
The only thing coming into Christmas that he had said to me, and I don't know what it meant, was, oh, yeah, I know you don't think I'm doing anything, but you're going to be real surprised. And I just looked at him and said, whatever, because I've been listening to this for 2 years and I ain't seen nothing yet as far as him getting a divorce.
This is a huge revelation for the investigators because this meant that Marianne now had a motive to commit murder.
After James Langley was set on fire, the results of an analysis of the burns on his body provide an important piece of the puzzle. The burns suggest whoever threw the gasoline on James was aiming for his genital area.
The pattern that was on James was more or less, he was protecting himself by putting his hands and arms down to protect his genitalia. That's why the burn pattern was on the back of his hands and his arms.
It was indicative that he was standing and that gasoline was thrown at him.
So the question that needs to be asked is, did Marianne intentionally set James on fire as payback for his affair?
Investigators think she did, and they believe the styrofoam cup left outside was part of a first attempt to do so. When the gas ate through the styrofoam, she switched to plastic to finish the deed. On December 22, 2006, 8 days after James's attack, Norwalk police once again questioned Marianne Langley.
There's a lot of things that when we discussed things on Saturday, there's a lot of things that turned out that you told me that I, to be honest with you, have reason to question the validity of it, okay? And
Yeah.
I asked you how the marriage was going and were there any problems or anything else, and you answered me, no. I said, is he seeing any other women? I don't think there's any other...
I said I didn't know.
Well, you did know, because you went over her house.
I hadn't been over to her house in years.
Marianne agrees to take a polygraph test to prove her innocence, but the results are inconclusive. The police officers have no choice but to let her go home.
Investigators' best hope for finding out what really happened is to speak with the victim, James Langley. But 12 days after the incident, that hope is dashed.
I got a phone call. I need to get to the hospital. I hear Ann crying in the background. So I got in the car and I flew to Bridgeport Hospital. We just stood in the room over top of him for a long time, just staring.
James passed away on December 26th at night. He went into cardiac arrest, and they fought feverishly to save him. And, I waited out in the hallway, and they was unable to save him.
That was the tough point. They just told me that, he fought as long as he could. That happened the day after Christmas. Christmas will never be the same for me. I try to make it the same, but it just won't never be the same.
The ruling of the autopsy was that it was a homicide based on the burn patterns and the severity of the burns, the location of the burns.
That's when the investigation really went into full force. I didn't want to think it was Zahn. I think being around her for 25 years or so, it didn't dawn on me that she could have did such a thing as they were saying that could have happened,
There was only two people in the house, her and my father. So at the end of the day, that's the only two people that know exactly what happened that night. I really believe is that she just wanted to hurt him because he'd been hurting her.
Corey has no proof, but in the days following his father's death, he does tell investigators about some suspicious things Mary Ann has done with the family business.
She tells me there is no money, but that's a lie because I just gave her a check for $3,000.
All right. But she's not paying you.
She hasn't paid, she's paid me once since my father's been gone.
Mary Ann wasn't explaining at all where any of the money was going.
We had a rock wall job going and a landscape job going. And next thing you know, we got a phone call saying to bring the bulldozer back. So I was like, what's going on? I'm asking questions. This is Mary Ann says, you gotta bring all of the machines back to the yard. And she sold the dump truck.
He also indicated that Mary Ann was trying to sell off both the business and the vehicles to the business.
In the prenup, she got nothing to do with J&L lawsuit.
She never did run the business. She just proceeded to sell off assets.
Investigators believe that she killed James in order to get control of the money and to get back at him for having an affair. On March 29, 2007, the police finally come knocking on Mary Ann's door and arrest her for James's murder.
She was aware that she was a suspect and going to be arrested. We arrested Mary Ann Langley at her home without incident. She was taken into custody, brought to headquarters.
But some fear it won't be quite as easy to get a conviction.
This case is not a simple open and shut case. Hey, somebody poured gasoline on their husband, lit him on fire. There are a lot of things that need to be focused on a lot more carefully.
On October 6, 2008, nearly 2 years after the death of James Langley, his wife, Mary Ann Langley, goes on trial for his murder.
Prosecutors framed the case where Mary Ann was this vindictive woman who was seeking revenge on her husband for cutting her out of the finances and also leaving her for another woman.
This all began, they say, because James told her that morning that he was leaving to retire to North Carolina, but not with her, but with another woman. They argue that because Mary Ann would not have gotten any of the money based on a prenup. James leaving Mary Ann would have left her destitute, and that enraged her.
Prosecutors argue that, over the course of 2 decades, Mary Ann Langley had grown used to an increasingly lavish lifestyle. When James threatened to take that away and give it to another woman, she decided to take her revenge.
And the fact that it seemingly threw the gasoline towards his genitalia speaks volumes.
The defense presents a different theory, based on Mary Ann's initial statement.
There wasn't any magic science behind this. It was gasoline that clearly was the accelerant in this case. The question has always been, how did it ignite? Who set him on fire? One of the main aspects of the defense was James Langley probably did this to himself. It was an accidental burning. And there was evidence to suggest that. James Langley's condition lent itself to the possibility that he actually poured gasoline in the cup so that he could drink it. And while that sounds a little far-fetched, we had an expert witness, an endocrinologist, testify that his condition, which was such that one of the symptoms that he would have exhibited was a massive thirst. When she was asked on the stand whether or not somebody in Mr. James Langley's condition would drink gasoline, she said they would.
On October 20th, 2008, the question of what happened to James Langley is put to the jury.
Murder would be planned with intent to death.
The jury finds Mary Ann Langley not guilty of murder, but they do find her guilty on a lesser charge of first-degree manslaughter.
Once you take gasoline and you throw it on somebody and you light a match, there's only one intention at that point in time for me, because you could try to kill somebody. She just wanted to hurt him for all the hurt, the pain he put her through.
Mary Ann Langley initially faces 12 years in prison, but her sentence is contingent on one condition.
At this point, she was supposed to give an apology to the family. However, she was very arrogant with her apology. It really wasn't an apology at all. And I think basically the judge switched his decision right at that point and gave her the maximum, which was 20 years.
I think the ugliest part of this whole case is the revenge factor. We've all known women who have been scorned. We've all had breakups. We've all been through this before. Do we all go out and try to kill our partners? No. So at some point, you have to be able to control that childish impulse that's inside of you. And if not, this is the result.
It's okay to be upset about something. It's okay to hurt, but sit in it, figure out where it's coming from, right? And if it's not healthy, get rid of it, and then move forward and have a happier life.
I don't believe in revenge, so you never get revenge. Two people are just going back and forth, hurting one another. This is basically what you're doing. Nobody never gets revenge. It's just a repetitive cycle. You can't prosper off other people's pain. My kids don't get to know who my father is. My kids have kids now. I got 7 grandkids. They'll never know who my father is, or get an opportunity to run around the yard the way we had an opportunity to run around the yard. That's the part that hurts the most.
Knoxville, Tennessee is a town that combines the convenience of city life with the rustic beauty of the rural South. But underneath that charm lies a bloody history of turf warfare and gang violence. In 2015, over the course of one night, a series of shootings would change one community forever. The city of Knoxville is a picturesque southern town nestled into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Sitting squarely in America's Bible Belt, it's a place where faith and family traditions run deep.
Faith is big, and everybody go to church on Sunday and then hang with family. The normal routine for me growing up, you go to church, you come home, have Sunday dinner with the family, we all sit and talk, and then later on we might go sit on the porch and talk the rest of the evening, just like everything stops on Sunday.
It's a church on every corner, and that's the way, we was raised. We was raised to be Christians, good God, believing people.
Knoxville's rich history dates back to the end of the American Revolution.
Knoxville was established in what was known as the Southwest Territory. This is before the state of Tennessee. Knoxville was designated as the capital of this territory.
Due to Knoxville's hilly and rocky terrain, agriculture never took off in the city like it did in other parts of the South.
And the eastern third of the state is very mountainous, and the soil is very barren, so it's hard to grow crops.
You can't grow cotton here. It's different from the rest of the South in that regard.
While other economies in the South were being built on the backs of slaves, Knoxville's lack of large-scale agriculture led to a much different approach toward Black workers.
So white settlers, the African Americans, were kind of teamed together. We worked together with mutual respect in the eastern part.
Black workers could find plenty of good jobs in Knoxville. Booming industries like paper, liquor, and marble mining led to thriving Black communities.
There was an area downtown called the Bottom, and that was, a section of downtown Knoxville that was dedicated, to Black businesses and Black business owners.
Been where the movie theaters were, where the dance halls, the barbershops, the doctor's offices, drugstores. There were middle-class Black people around that area.
Downtown was thriving, particularly with Black businesses and Black people, period.
But unfortunately, the boom times for Knoxville's Black residents would be short-lived, all for the sake of what city leaders would call progress.
Urban renewal came in the context of building this new Coliseum, right, to attract tourism and attract people.
They said, well, we need to put it up on a hill. But of course, up on the hill was where the middle-class Black people had residences. And they decided to condemn all that.
Some people would call it Negro removal. That's what it was. So all the Black houses that were owned at that time, they were forced to move out. There was a Black theater downtown called the Gym Theater. It's now a dog park, right? It's just that symbolism says a lot about where things have been.
The city's displaced Black residents were pushed into low-income communities, like Austin Homes to the east and Western Heights and Lonsdale to the west.
We grew up in Lonsdale, and life was pretty harsh. I can remember hearing gunshots, and me and my mom, we had to get on the ground sometimes. It was just dangerous. It was the east side versus west side going on back in the early 90s.
The crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s hit Knoxville particularly hard, and with it came gangs and turf warfare.
Once the hard drugs and stuff started coming in, it's like now. You know what I'm saying? It don't matter what it is, you red or blue. We're fighting over who's going to get that sale, who's going to make that dollar. When the big dollars started coming in, people started dying.
The east side of town was Blood territory, and the west side of town was Crip territory. That's pretty much how law enforcement defined the two different gang territories.
Being situated in the city's west side, Lonsdale became a frequent target of east side gangs.
I can tell you back in the early 90s, we had a lot of gang activity, a lot of shooting. Brittany Daniels got killed, and that was a big thing. And then we had a young man on the basketball court got killed. I think just the gang violence, Lonsdale was such a easy picking at the time because people was really laid back and loving village. It was just something new they wasn't ready for.
And on one night in the winter of 2015, Lonsdale would once again erupt into East versus West violence. Thursday, December 17th, 2015, shortly after 10 p.m., Knoxville police get a flurry of 911 calls about a shooting in Lonsdale homes.
Hello?
I heard gunshots outside my house. Come out here right now.
How many did you hear?
Oh my God!
When the officers arrived on scene, it was a lot of people and a very chaotic scene.
They find a 15-year-old young man lying on the back porch, suffering from a gunshot wound. A vast number of shell casings scattered throughout the road. Bullet holes in the apartment, bullet holes in cars. And these young people upset, crying because their friend has been killed for absolutely no reason.
Witnesses identified the victim as 15-year-old Zavion Dobson. Zavion was the youngest of three brothers born and raised in Lonsdale homes.
When I was pregnant with Zavion, we had the same heartbeat for 9 months. And those little kicks in my belly just kept telling me that this baby held a special place in my heart. When this baby was born, I knew he was special because he saved my life. I know he saved my life from some of the tough times that I went through, but tough times don't always last, tough people do. But come to find out that these three sons of mine that I had made me be strong. It made me love my kids more. It made me the woman that I am today.
Zavion was very different. He was very different, very loving, very strong-minded young kid, man. And he was just something else. He loved my mama so much, his words can't even describe. When he wasn't there, he's just like, Marquesa, just make sure mama's okay. Marquesa, make sure mama ate. He made sure that mama came first in all aspects of his life.
He protected his family. He would protect me if it was necessary for him to do so. He was a protector. I thank God that he chose me to be his mother.
Having grown up in Lonsdale herself, Zenobia was well aware of the dangers her sons faced.
There were hardships there, but the love outweighed the hardships and the bad. You know, we didn't want anyone coming in our community doing a drive-by. We wanted to keep our kids safe. Teaching them discipline was always a challenge from time to time, but they knew the rules. And I had to let them know real quick that, hey, this is right from wrong.
She got her boys to church. She raised them in the church. She taught them right from wrong and gave them that moral compass.
We played sports. We was always into sports. And that really kept us out of trouble for real. We was playing basketball, football, hockey, soccer, it don't matter.
She was on my first flag football team all the time. Coach want to run the ball, I remember one game, I think we was playing against maybe West on the field. I finally let him run the ball and he scored. And he was just so happy. He scored. He said, see, Coach, I told you I could score.
Zavion went on to play football for Fulton High School. For him, it was more than just a game. It was an obsession.
He wrote his own plays and he went back and studied the game and learned the game. One thing that I do know he learned is discipline. Being on time, doing your homework, respecting your coach, respecting your peers, respecting your mother, respecting your teachers, respecting it all the way around on all levels of your life.
He used to sleep with his football at night. I was like, dang, Zahn, you really sleeping with that football? He's like, yeah, I'm gonna be a big NFL star one day. He really used to say that.
The times that I saw him play football, I was somewhat amazed. Physicality aside, to execute that mentality, it takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of focus.
Xavier told me when he's on the field, he's in beast mode. And that's how he got the number 24. And I know that number 24 symbolizes strength and courage.
Although he was just in his sophomore year, Xavier was already planning for his future.
His goals and achievements were based around sports. He had the ambition to go to college. He loved Oregon Ducks. He would always show me the uniforms and the colors and watch their games on TV. He knew that if he was well-rounded and well-disciplined, that he could achieve any goal that he had in his mind, that he felt like he could conquer.
Now, those dreams have been cut short by a hell of gunfire, and police are looking for answers.
I was in a nightmare. My heart shattered into pieces. My baby boy.
"15-year-old Xavier Dobson has been killed during a shooting in Knoxville's Lonsdale Homes. According to his mother, it happened while Xavier was out with his friends.
He called me on the phone. He was with his friends. They were at the game. And he told his friends, y'all be quiet because mama's on the phone. Y'all chill out for a minute. And he called me again and asked me, could he go to one of his friends' house? And I told him just to come home. And he came home. He stood in the door, waited on me. He held the door open for me. Zach, Xavier, and Xavier, they came in and sat down, cracked a little jokes, you know, talked about their day at school and talked about the game. And they talked about who all they saw at the game and how exciting it was at Fulton. And they asked for permission to go see Dewey, Faith, and Kiara, a couple of blocks away from where I lived in Lonsdale. And maybe like 30 minutes later, after they walked out the door, I heard gunshots. And as I heard those gunshots, I was just hoping and praying that everything was gonna be okay. After someone came to my house knocking on my door and telling me that I needed to come with this lady. She told me, Zenobia, I need you to come with me. And I was like, what's going on? She said, you just need to come with me. It's Zach. It's your boys. So by the time I got up the street, I saw yellow tape. And when I saw yellow tape, I saw Zach. He said, Mom, he just had a look. He said, it's Xavier. He said, Xavier didn't make it.
Witnesses tell police they'd all gathered at one of their houses after the game.
December 17th, that was like the last day of school. So these high school kids, they are just spending the evening on the back porch of this lady's apartment.
They were over at one of the girls' aunt's house. And the aunt, quite frankly, had said, you know, maybe if I keep them out on the porch, it's cold, they'll quiet.
She was fine with the young ladies having company over. But since they were boys, she wanted them to stay out on the porch. No boys inside the house. And it was, you know, about 10 o'clock.
Those collection of 6 kids see some individuals coming towards them, and they just knew immediately that something wasn't right. They knew by looking at these guys who were dressed in all black with hoodies that they needed to get out of there.
That's where the gunfire started, and everyone scattered.
They did not only just shoot up the porch, but they shot up the entire house. We're talking about the entire home, first floor, second floor, porch, the whole thing was just riddled with bullets.
2 of the girls say Xavier stayed behind to help them, and he wound up saving their lives.
When the gunshots started, he knew he wouldn't have time to get off the porch. It's evident from what he did. He dropped on these 2 girls and started pulling lawn furniture over them to try and protect them.
done, they asked Zahn to get off, and they got up and they went about their way, but then they noticed that he wasn't moving.
They knew that Zahn had been hit, and they went into the house and immediately called 911. Unfortunately, Zahn was killed on that porch.
He actually laid down his life for theirs, like he made the ultimate sacrifice.
Zahn was a protector. I could see Zahn protecting Faith and Kiara. Zahn knew that he was in danger, and that was just his instinct to protect. And that night, I knew. When they told me everything that he did, I could believe it, because that was the type of kid that I know I raised.
I can only stand in awe of that much courage and that sort of quick thinking.
Based on the nature of the shooting, investigators believe it may have been gang-related.
The kids that were on the porch really were not able to give a very good description. However, there was another individual in Lonsdale that night, another young man, who was on a different porch, and he encountered the shooters before they got to the porch.
They were all dressed similarly, and they had on either red shoes or red shoestrings. One of the individuals came up to him and made a comment of, "What's bracken?" and what are you banging? And this comment stood out to him because he recognized that comment as gang language, and this young man is not a gang member. And so...
But as police will soon discover, it's only the beginning.
There wasn't a question, is there going to be a next one? It's, can we stop the next one?
Knoxville police are investigating the death of 15-year-old Zahn Dobson, who was killed when unidentified gunmen opened fire on him and his friends. And detectives soon realize Zahn's is the third shooting in just the past few hours. The first one had occurred at around 5 p.m. at a nearby housing development called Western Heights.
Hey, I live on Fort Thomas, and I just heard a lot of gunshots, and it was quite a bit of gunshots. I mean, at first, it was so many that I didn't think it was gunshots, but yeah, it was definitely gunshots.
At the time, the possible gunman was identified as 23-year-old Brandon Perry.
We believe what started the events was Brandon Perry going into Western Heights and dropping his girlfriend off at a store, and then him going back to pick her up. There was some type of altercation between him and some other guy.
She saw someone that she knew to be the cousin of the father of her children. And so she spoke to him, he spoke to her, and Brandon Perry did not like that. And so there were words exchanged.
Brandon, I don't know if he went to a vehicle to recover a firearm or he had one on, but that's when rounds were fired, shots were fired at that point. And then Brandon left the area, and then the call to police was made. So the investigative team from our major crimes unit showed up, and no one had been hit, and so they were just processing the scene for what had happened.
Detectives run Brandon's information and discover he's no stranger to law enforcement, particularly to the Knoxville Police Gang Unit.
Brandon had a bit of a history and some gang involvement. He was somebody that they were familiar with.
Just as investigators dig deeper into Brandon's background, dispatch receives another frantic 911 call, this time from Brandon Perry's own home.
Someone just shot up our house. My mama just got shot. Please hurry.
KPD responds to that home. When they get there, Lisa Perry, who is Brandon Perry's mother, is in their family home, and more than 20 shots have been fired into her home. There are shots that have broken the plate glass window. They've gone through the front door. They've gone around the side of the house. She and her 10-year-old daughter were watching a Christmas movie, had just finished that movie, and heard the shots. So they tried to run through the house to get away from the shots, and Lisa Perry, Brandon's mother, was actually shot in the hip area.
She was injured, a serious injury, but wasn't life-threatening. And so she clearly upset and confused.
The police observed a number of casings there at the house. I believe about 20 some casings there at the house, different caliber of casings. And they started their investigation.
As investigators begin collecting evidence, Brandon returns home with his cousin, Chris Bassett.
That then, of course, got our attention. And now we've got two scenes where the same individual is involved.
They had interactions with him there at the home, and he said he knew nothing about what was going on, could give them no information.
The family is trying to calm Brandon Perry and Chris Bassett down, trying to convince the two of them to just go to the hospital to check on Miss Perry to see that she's okay. And they're visibly upset, and they will not listen.
Behind the Perry home, and it was written in red paint. There were some words that would indicate some relation to gang.
I think in law enforcement, we are aware that some people would consider Lonsdale a Crip territory. And, you know, we had information that Brandon Perry's house has some type of blood affiliation because of the graffiti. And just based upon that preliminarily, we thought maybe the two shootings were connected.
The question is, what's next? You know, and the reality is, you know, there's already somebody acting to retaliate. So where are they? And where are they going? And can we stop the next one?
A string of shootings in the Knoxville area have police concerned about possible gang warfare. The violence has already claimed the life of 15-year-old Zavion Dobson, and detectives fear the crime spree may not be over.
You know, the city was basically on lockdown from that hour further. I mean, every car we had was out there watching anything. Everybody was suspect, driving anywhere between Lonsdale and this east side housing development. So there were cars being stopped right and left. If you were moving, you were stopped because we were trying the best to keep any further incidents from happening at that point.
Around 2 a.m., those fears are realized.
Another shots fired call. This time, car had crashed into one of the apartments, and black males ran away from the vehicle. An investigator was not far at all. He was the first one on scene before patrol officers. He may have even heard the shots being fired. The doors were open on the vehicle, and holes throughout the car. One individual, black male, still inside, slumped over.
It appears the victim was killed while driving into the apartment complex, and the investigator immediately recognizes him. It's Brandon Perry, the man they'd just interviewed at the previous shooting.
Brandon Perry and Chris Bassett were in a vehicle, and a car comes up and shoots into the car, striking Brandon Perry. Since he is driving the car when he's shot, the car crashes into the apartment complex.
Christopher Bassett returns to the scene of the crash on foot. He tells police he was also in the car when it was shot up.
The police, they're willing to sit there and listen to Chris Bassett for as long as it takes for him to talk about his cousin and what happened to his cousin. And then once they get that information from him, then they're going to back up and see what other information they can get.
While Christopher Bassett is transported to police headquarters, investigators flood the scene.
It's a chaotic scene. You've got this car that's crashed into the wall. You've got people from the apartment that's coming out trying to find out what's going on.
So law enforcement began to interview people and collected anything they could from the car, from the scene.
There was some video of the vehicle entering and leaving this location, but it wasn't that great. Another car, as best we can tell, they both come in simultaneously into the area, and then the other car flees. I don't know if it was this earlier group or if it was a new group that went to retaliate for Zavion's murder.
While investigators continue to work on identifying the shooters, Police Chief Roush holds a press conference to address the death of Zavion Dobson.
It was a tough press conference. I think what laid on my heart the biggest during that press conference was the fact that there was this young black male who had risen to the call. right? That he did what everyone in my profession would do, right? We would jump in the way of danger to save someone. He did that with.
While the national issue of gun violence has no easy fix, investigators in Knoxville are about to get a break in Zavion's case.
We got information, where you would not normally get it, and I think that's for a couple reasons. One, his story, his heroic actions. Two is, I think the reality of my human response. I think the culmination of that activated the community. I think everybody wanted to see those responsible held accountable.
Knoxville police are investigating the violent deaths of Zavion Dobson and Brandon Perry, who were both gunned down within hours of each other on separate sides of town. And investigators are hell-bent on preventing more bloodshed.
The lead investigator in this, A.J. Leffler, did an amazing job. He had 2 homicides he was working and an aggravated assault of the shooting of Brandon's mother. AJ was trying to piece together all of these cases, and of course he wasn't doing it by himself. He had the whole team in major crimes that were engaged in this.
Investigators are still working the scene of Brandon Perry's murder in East Knoxville when a few of Brandon's friends stepped forward with information about that night. They too wanted the carnage to end.
They were giving us information about Mr. Perry's shooting, and it turned out the more we talked to the people, the more we realized that shooting was connected to the Lonsdale shooting involving Zavion.
Police have Perry's cousin, Christopher Bassett, in custody. He was also in the car when Perry was gunned down in the drive-by.
As soon as I look, I just see a gun. Somebody starts shooting. All the time I heard boom, 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 boom. I'm trying to look, make sure everything's okay. I look over, he laying back like this. He laying back like this, and all I see is blood just squirting out. And then the car rolling to the building, so I try to grab it and try to put it in park, but I don't know if his foot on the gas or I don't know.
The detective questions Christopher about Zavion's shooting in Lonsdale as well.
So tell me what Brandon did out there in Lonsdale.
Honestly?
Yeah.
I don't know what Brandon did, honestly.
It was just obvious to investigators that Brandon Perry's shooting had to have some relationship to Brandon Perry being in Lonsdale earlier that night.
You were there. You were there. Don't lie to me. Don't say you weren't, because we already know.
It was, I wasn't there. And then it was, I was there, but I didn't have a gun. And then it was, I had the gun, but I didn't fire it at anyone, right? The ability to get them from, I'm not there, to I fired a gun is huge, and it's timely.
I shot in the air, man. I didn't aim at him. I didn't aim at him because I was real life scared. I just didn't want to feel like a bitch.
Based upon his 20 years of being an investigator and just, reading Chris Bassett's body language, you could tell that he was holding something back. And then the closer you got to Lonsdale, the more he implicated himself in the shooting. Another thing that investigator Leffler was able to do is he was able to get Bassett to identify the other 2 people that were with him. And he identified Richard Williams and Kipling Colbert.
Police file a weapons charge against Bassett to keep him in custody while they search for the other 2 men.
There was nowhere to hide at this point. And I think anyone that had any knowledge at that point understood that they could be part of the solution. And they needed to be part of the solution, and they needed to honor Zavion's memory by helping resolve this.
Nearly 1 month later, police finally capture Richard Williams.
In January, I think we got our first break. We pulled Williams over on a traffic stop, and as part of the traffic stop, we were able to determine there was a gun in the car. We were able to determine that the gun that Mr. Williams had with him did eventually link back to the shooting of Zavion.
Kipling Colbert was the next suspect to fall. The witness from Lonsdale who had encountered the gunman the night of Zavion's shooting later recognized Colbert in a video wearing some of the same clothing.
The more we talked with him, he said, yes, I can identify him. I saw him on this video. He's in the video with them. That's the same person I saw that night.
By the end of 2016, Bassett, Williams, and Colbert have all been indicted, paving the way for a murder trial.
There was no place to hide for those boys. That's right. Because Xavion was such an all-American kid. It could have been any one of our children. And when something happens like that, that is so nonsensical, the entire community says, we will find you and we will stop this. And that's what happened.
In December of 2017, nearly 2 years after the death of Xavion Dobson, the trial of Christopher Bassett, Richard Williams, and Kipling Colbert gets underway.
Trying one case with 3 defendants at the same time can only be a huge, huge undertaking.
It's been our experience, anytime you have a co-defendant case, if at all possible, you want to try them together, if you can. You want the jury to get the full picture of the individuals that you are saying is responsible for these crimes.
According to prosecutors, Brandon Perry was out for revenge after his mother was injured in a drive-by shooting. He believed a rival gang based in Lonsdale was to blame, so he rounded up Bassett, Williams, and Colbert to help him get payback and to send a message.
It was a misunderstanding in another part of town, another drive-by that had absolutely nothing to do with Xavion. And the guys that it impacted went on an angry streak, just going from neighborhood to neighborhood just to seek revenge, and decided to come to Lonsdale.
It's been very easy for, young people to get their hands on a gun and wreak havoc, wherever feel that they need to.
Each of the defense attorneys try and shift blame solely onto Brandon Perry.
Easiest thing in the world is to make the person that can't defend themselves the person that's responsible. But that's not what the evidence played out for us. The strongest evidence played out that Bassett was the trigger on Xavion.
If you're working together in tandem, you're responsible for somebody's conduct. And so that was the approach that we took. I don't care who fired the fatal round. All of you individuals that were there that night in Lonsdale seeking revenge for Mr. Perry's mother being shot, every single one of you is responsible for that bullet that pierced Mr. Dobson's body. You went to Lonsdale, 10 o'clock at night, firing upon completely innocent people that had absolutely nothing to do with your mama being shot. These completely innocent kids who were enjoying the last night of school on the back porch.
In February of 2018, the jury renders its verdicts.
The jury found Chris Bassett guilty of first-degree murder and multiple counts of attempted first-degree murder. They found Mr. Williams and Mr. Colbert guilty of facilitating the crime of first-degree murder, multiple counts attempted first-degree murder, employing a firearm in the commission of a dangerous felony.
When you really do represent a victim and you really do paint that picture to the jury, and the jury comes back and does the right thing and really punishes someone for taking a life, that is a feeling like no other.
When we finished with the verdict and Zenobia and her family were back in the DA's chambers, I expected some sense of at least her to say justice has been served or something, but that woman, her very first response, very first thing out of her mouth, she said, "Can we just pray for those boys and their families?" She was heartbroken, and she understood nobody won that day.
I am Xavion's mother. I am Xavion's voice. It's very necessary for me to make sure justice is served on behalf of my loved one. He was innocent. His life mattered. There are consequences. You should be held accountable.
Bassett, Williams, and Colbert Each received sentences of more than 100 years in prison. In the years since Zavion's death, his mother has continued to work to end gun violence and to honor the life of her son.
She goes out and does the groundwork actually in the communities and try to touch these kids, try to grab a hold of these kids and let them know about Zavion's story.
Zenobia has set up a nonprofit, and its mission is to provide educational and recreational activities and engagement for.
Clarksdale, Mississippi is known as the birthplace of the blues. It has produced numerous music legends, including 7 inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But it's situated in a region darkened by a history of racism, marked by the notorious lynching of 14-year-old Emmett Till in 1955. Nearly 60 years later, the mysterious murder of an aspiring black politician in this deeply southern town reopens old wounds. And when disturbing details of the crime hit the national press, many fear history is repeated. Clarksdale is a small town on the Mississippi River, about an hour south of the Tennessee border. It's a city where the roots of a rich black history run deep, but that history has come at the cost of centuries of tremendous struggle and suffering. From slavery to Jim Crow, Clarksdale's black residents have never had an easy road, and inequality and hardships have always been a way of life. But out of that pain, Clarksdale gave birth to something beautiful, the musical genre known as the blues.
Clarksdale has always been a place of the blues. A lot of blues musicians came from here. Ike Turner, Muddy Waters, Charlie Pride.
There was also Robert Johnson, and there's stories about him selling his soul to the devil to become an excellent guitar player, and that's supposed to happen right here in Coahoma County at the crossroads. The blues has its own method of speaking to the masses, and it was created by blacks for blacks. So therefore, a black singing the blues, another black can understand and feel his heartbreak and what he was going through there.
But despite such important contributions to the city, Clarksdale's black residents still have very little to show for it, thanks to a system that is designed to keep them unequal and unrepresented.
For the last 100 years, you would have a small minority controlling the masses here. We would always have 3 or 4, sometimes 5 white supervisors that controlled the entire county, but you had 80% of the county being black.
We don't own a lot of things, so others think that why should you have a voice?
It's a concentrated effort to make sure that the people in power stay in power and the people out of power stay out of power.
In 1955, the lynching of 14-year-old Emmett Till in nearby Drew, Mississippi brought tensions in the region to a boiling point.
Well, history has it that we walked into a store to buy some candy, and for whatever reason, the lady in the store felt uncomfortable with him and let it be known to other white guys in the community. And so they went to his home, got him out of the bed, and took him to the lake.
2 white men shot Emmett, tied a heavy fan to his body, and threw him into the Tallahatchie River.
It's an ugly history, it really is. But I've always been told, if you don't learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Emmett Till's murder made national headlines, shocking the nation and fueling the civil rights movement.
That was the spark that started the flame for desegregation.
People began to speak more about the issues related to racism in the South. African Americans began to organize.
But the old wounds of the past still haunt this town. And in 2013, a man who dreamed of bringing change to Clarksdale would be ripped from the community in yet another horrifying murder. On the morning of February 25th, 2013, the Coahoma County Sheriff's Office gets a call from a family concerned their son, Marco McMillan, has gone missing. Marco's family tells police he left the house around 10 p.m. on Sunday night to move his car and never came back. Neither they nor Marco's friends have been able to reach him on his phone, which is highly unusual.
Marco was texting, communicating, joking throughout the day, not just with his friends, but everyone, right? His fraternity brothers. It's just not like Marco to go off rail, not like that. My gut instinct said, this is not going to end well.
Marco McMillan was born on April 23, 1979, to a devoted family who worked hard to provide him with a stable and loving home.
There was plenty of structure, plenty of love, plenty of understanding. I would say those things were present in the home.
Marco had a heart for people, and he never met a stranger. Marco made you feel seen, he made you feel welcome. He took everybody under his wings, and he also was a person of action. If Marco said that he was going to do something, he did it.
In high school, Marco's natural leadership skills began to emerge in a big way.
Marco was an excellent student, wise beyond his years of age. He used to talk with me sometimes, and I would just look at him. Marco, you are 17 years old. But I think he was planning then, how can I change things? What can I do to make things better or different?
After graduating, Marco left Clarksdale to attend Jackson State University. He became heavily involved in one of the school's black fraternities, Phi Beta Sigma. He would go on to work for the national chapter in Washington, D.C.
He became the international executive director of the Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. That was big news for Clarksdale community. So he learned a lot from economics, learned a lot about city management, he learned a lot about all of those things. And I'm sure he wanted to implement some of those when he came back to Clarksdale.
15 years after leaving Clarksdale, Marco brought his talent and experience back to his beloved hometown.
He wanted to know, why were we in poverty? Why we didn't have adequate housing? He saw that there could be these kinds of things in this community if the ones that had gone away to school would come home and do this. And so I believe that's why he came home, because he felt that the vision that he had of making this town different, he could contribute.
Marco decided the best way he could contribute was by running for mayor of Clarksdale.
He thought that the mayor could be the catalyst to bring a lot of things into the city. He wanted black people to have more of a voice, and he wanted to be that voice.
The difference is made when you have a heart for the people.
Marco knew his calling in life. That is the best way I can put it. Marco knew what he was put on this earth to do, and that was to shine a light on darkness.
But Marco's campaign faced some unique challenges.
He was black and gay, but he wasn't black and gay as a candidate, if you will. Obviously, he was an African American. I mean, that's clear. But Marco never ran as a gay candidate.
Marco was just Marco around here. People did not think of him as a gay man. The impression I got is people knew him as an individual, not as a gay man, not as a black man, but as Marco McMillan, you know, a young and upcoming guy.
Although Marco didn't make his identity central to his campaign, it still put a potential target on his back in his deeply southern hometown.
I had a passion to do things in politics in Mississippi, but like so many other, LGBTQ plus individuals, you're afraid to run. Even at that time, I hadn't even came out in Mississippi. So absolutely, I had reservations about Marco coming to the deep south of Clarksdale.
Marco made his platform clear from the start, even though it wasn't likely to gain him many supporters from Clarksdale's powerful elites.
His platform was going to be education, economic development, job creation, and one of the sticky pieces of that was going to be actually looking at auditing Clarksdale books. He felt as though Clarksdale had received millions and millions of dollars over the course of the years and nothing has happened, right? So he really wanted to hold political leaders accountable.
Some people, as we know, would take what was meant for good and use it for evil.
Marco was on a mission to disrupt what he saw as Clarksdale's good old boy system, a system he felt had been corrupted for a long time.
I will go back as far as I need to go back to trace why Clarksdale, Mississippi is not matching up to the funding that the federal government is putting in this small town.
Between Marco's outsider status and his political crusades against Clarksdale's old guard, many of his friends worried for his safety.
I would say, be careful. You're dealing with a different type of people in this town. Watch your back. You may not want to open up so many cans of worms right now. Don't let your left know what your right is doing.
I said, if there's a weakness out there, somebody will find it and may exploit it.
Marco's friends now fear those concerns may have been realized. At the behest of Marco's loved ones, the sheriff's office opens a missing persons investigation. Less than a day later, they receive an emergency call that changes everything.
There was a car crash out on the highway, and it involved Marco McMillan's vehicle. At that time, no one knew who was driving. We assumed it was Marco, but it just didn't make any sense. And so it was a strange little story from the outset.
Me every day as a dad is him. Every day he's hungry for something. And there's this huge responsibility in making sure that he's a good person. I think the advice I would give is you don't need to know all the answers. It's okay to make mistakes. As long as it's coming from love, then it kind of starts to work itself out.
The sheriff's office in Clarksdale, Mississippi is investigating the disappearance of mayoral candidate Marco McMillan. But when they're called to the scene of a grisly car crash, it appears the search might be ending as quickly as it began.
On that morning, February 26th of 2013, I was leaving the sheriff's department and I heard a 1050, which is a traffic accident with some injuries, call out on the radio.
First responders rushed to the scene, where a white Chevrolet and a black Tahoe have been involved in a head-on collision.
When I arrived on scene, the Tahoe was sitting sideways in the middle of the road and the front end was completely pushed in. Oils and liquids and every kind of fluid leaking everywhere, glass strewn all over the streets, just a mess. The other truck was like a white Chevrolet that he had hit head on. It was out in the field.
Witnesses say the driver of the Tahoe is the one responsible for the crash.
Even though it was out in the county, there were people living right on the roadway who definitely heard it, definitely saw it. I remember folks saying that it looked like the vehicle had steered directly into oncoming traffic and purposely hit another vehicle.
When officers run the Tahoe's information, they're surprised to find it's registered to their missing person.
It was tagged out of Tennessee to a Marco McMillan. At that time, someone alerted me on scene that that was the subject that was running for mayor and that they thought he had family in Clarksdale.
But the injured man lying in the back seat of the SUV is not Marco.
The impact threw him all the way into the back seat of the vehicle. And he had a large amount of skin and glass in all of his arms. He was bleeding profusely. I tried to ask his name and he wouldn't want to answer any questions or anything like that.
And it was just this weird bag of mysteries. Who is this guy? You know, why was he driving Marco's vehicle? Why did he, apparently, according to witnesses, purposely crash headlong into oncoming traffic?
Right away, police treat the situation as highly suspicious.
Anytime you have someone driving someone else's vehicle, there could be robbery. That could be a motive.
I immediately thought, hey, this is a stolen vehicle, and that's why the guy's not wanting to give any information. But at the same time, then we've got a missing person involved in it to where we can't locate.
As officers consider the implications, a panicked woman arrives on the scene. She says the driver of the Tahoe is her ex-boyfriend, Lawrence Reed, and he'd come to her that morning with a terrifying confession.
She explained that she knew him and had dated him previously, but she didn't really want anything to do with him. And that morning, he showed up before the accident, stating to her that he possibly just killed someone and that he was gonna kill himself. He didn't know what to do.
you want to see a friendly face. And basically his ex-girlfriend, if I recall, was like, I don't know what to tell you, man. You've come to the wrong house. I don't traffic in murders.
She said that he got in the vehicle and drove off, and that's when she heard the accident happen. Once the female witness gave me that information that he possibly was involved in a homicide, I immediately went to the ambulance and placed a handcuff on him onto the stretcher so that he could not try to leave till we had him in a proper authority's hand.
Reed is taken into custody, but police are left with more questions than answers.
It was a strange case. We had the confession before we had the victim.
How did he get in the vehicle? Where was Marco? What was going on?
Candidate Marco McMillan has been missing for nearly 2 days now, and his car has mysteriously turned up at the scene of a violent highway crash. The driver, 22-year-old Lawrence Reed, has been arrested on suspicion of murder, and once his injuries are stabilized, police are anxious to get some answers.
My chief deputy sent one of our deputies en route to the hospital to speak with him about this incident, and they started gathering more information there.
Reed grew up in the nearby town of Shelby, Mississippi. After graduating high school, he moved to Clarksdale and found work at a pizza place.
Frankly, the folks I talked to who knew him said he wasn't all that bright. He wasn't the sort of person who was malicious, and certainly wasn't the sort of person who could plan a crime like this. You know, you're not really talking about somebody who's a criminal mastermind here. And the more the story unfolded, almost the less sense it made.
When police ask Reed about the crash, he confirms he was trying to kill himself, and the reason why is linked to Marco's disappearance 2 days ago.
Reed stated to the investigators that he was walking in Clarksdale when he was approached by McMillan in a vehicle. McMillan asked him if he wanted to go to a party in Marks, Mississippi with him.
Reed says he didn't know Marco that well, but decided to take him up on the offer.
Marco picked Reed up. They drove to the next county over, went to the McDonald's and the gas station, got some blunts, put some marijuana in them, then drove out to a county road.
According to Reed, that's when things took a darker turn. He says Marco pulled over on one of the back roads outside town and began to pressure Reed into a sexual encounter.
Reed stated that McMillan tried to show him some pornography on his phone while exposing himself to Reed. Reed didn't want to have any part of that and asked to get out of the vehicle.
McMillan tried to grab him, tried to undress him in the car, and Reed said he was just terrified. I remember him saying, you know, I'm a little guy, and he was a much smaller person than McMillan.
Reed tells investigators that he thought he was about to be sexually assaulted, so he fought back, and things quickly spiraled out of control.
They got into a fight where Reed ended up strangling McMillan with a chain off of his wallet.
Reed claimed he panicked and pushed Marco out of the vehicle. Once outside, the attack continued.
During that strangulation, he thought he was still alive, so he pushed his head down in some water until he was sure he was dead. Then he placed the body back inside of the vehicle.
Despite the outcome, Reed insists he never intended to kill Marco.
He claimed it was an accident, but once he realized what he'd done, he freaked out and drove all the way back to Clarksdale with the dead body in the car.
He stated to the other investigators that he rode around with it all morning until he could figure out somewhere to take the body to.
I couldn't tell you what his mindset was because, again, I certainly wasn't there. What you do with it at that point is you call the authorities and say, hey, I accidentally killed a guy.
Reed says he moved Marco's body into the woods and removed all his clothing. He then proceeded to try and destroy Marco's body.
What he did was he decided to buy a gallon of gasoline or something, which is not enough to burn a human body, and took him behind the levee and tried to get rid of the body.
Unfortunately, Reed doesn't remember exactly where he left Marco's body. He's only able to give police a vague description of the area.
The two men had been drinking and they were probably high, so possibly that had something to do with it. It's not for me to say what caused what, but I can certainly understand why he might be in a distressed state.
Without evidence to back any of his claims, detectives aren't sure how much of Reed's story to believe. But Marco's loved ones have already begun to fear the worst.
I kept feeling it in the pit of my stomach. This will not go well. Days later, I found out what had happened, and it was exactly what my gut was telling me.
Banks of the Mississippi River looking for Marco McMillan's body.
Myself, along with some search and rescue officers, went to the area and started checking every road leading down the side of the levee. By that time of the evening, it was getting dark, probably around 5:30, and we checked until we couldn't see anymore. So we called it a night, and I started back that next morning with my chief deputy. During the night, the investigators received information from Reed that he said that he dropped a body by an orange tractor. Well, I remembered seeing a red tractor, and I know one of the cattle farmers there has a small red tractor, and I remember seeing it in an area. So when I went back down to that area, the tractor had been moved down the levee on the opposite side. There was a grass trail leading down the levee on the riverside, and I could see tracks leading down in the grass to the bottom where a vehicle turned around and came out. So when I walked down the trail to where the vehicle tracks were, you could see some drag marks in the grass leading towards the barbed wire fence. When I was about to step over the fence, I looked ahead. There was a large tree, and I could see the bare feet of a human sitting behind that tree. So at that time, I crossed the fence and located the body of Marco McMillan.
Reed's description of the murder, though graphic, still does not prepare investigators for what they see.
He was naked. His hair and face and chest were singed and had some blistering of like it'd been set on fire. I remember a gash to his forehead. And I also located a bottle right by him, I wanted to say, that still smelled like an accelerant, like gasoline or something. At that point, we backed out, contacted the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, which their crime scene unit, along with Coroner Scotty Meredith, arrived on scene.
I observed him on the west side of the tree. I couldn't tell if he had been strangled, if his hyoid bone was broke or anything like that from outside looking in. I saw a few bruises and I saw a few blisters, from the burns. We bagged him, put bags on his hands to preserve any evidence for if there was any scratch marks or anything like that. If he had clawed or fought his defender, he would have something on his fingers.
The true motive behind Marco's murder is still unclear, even with Reed's own confession. But much of what he says he did to Marco is supported by the evidence at the scene.
You can see where he was drugged from the car to the behind that tree, and he's a pretty good sized man. He wasn't a little bitty fella.
We photographed the drag marks and the tire impressions.
What we decided with the circumstances and all the connections and the power of all to be, we were going to take him straight to the crime lab.
On February 28th, Lawrence Reed is officially charged with murder. On March 9th, Marco's devastated family and friends lay him to rest.
Everyone attended the funeral. It was just an outpouring of love for Marco and his family. We knew what Marco stood for. We knew what he was trying to do, what he was trying to accomplish. And he was working for the people, for the community. It wasn't selfish in his heart in no form or fashion.
I was always told as a child growing up that the attendance at your funeral sort of told the kind of life you live. Looking at the number of people in attendance, they too were in awe of what happened. Beautiful, beautiful ceremony. Beautiful.
Although investigators keep many of the details of Marco's death confidential while the investigation is ongoing, in a small town like Clarksdale, It doesn't take long for rumors to begin swirling throughout the city.
They found that Marco's body was behind the levee, slightly burned, and that just sent the whole area into this tailspin of rumors and gossip, stories, as you would expect.
One rumor that begins to permeate throughout the city is that Marco was dragged with a vehicle, inciting fears that his death may have been a modern-day lynching.
Lynchings are a very real part of the history of the South, and obviously they're horrific crimes. Almost always they involve the mutilation of the person, then of the corpse, and just the defilement of the body.
But coroner Scotty Meredith says Marco was dragged away from the vehicle, not with it.
That went way, way bad. They put him behind the car and drug him. No, that's not what happened. He was drugged from the car to the scene, which was not very far, maybe 25 feet, if that far. And that's a big deal. Being drugged was a big deal. When we say drag, the guy that killed him got under his arms probably and pulled him out of the car, and his 2 feet drugged the ground 25 feet maybe.
I don't know of too many lynchings or too many hate crimes against African Americans committed by other African Americans. That's the part that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. You know, I mean, I've got a degree in Southern history, and I've never heard of anything like that.
Another rumor that grabs hold is that Reed may have simply been a pawn in a much larger conspiracy, and that he may have murdered Marco on the direct orders of someone who felt threatened by Marco's run for mayor.
When you have a young upcoming individual such as Marco, you're going to have some whites that's going to be afraid of that. You're going to have some people that feel as if, okay, if this individual is such a threat of this nature, we need to band together and do something. I hate to think that Marco was murdered because of that, but we don't know.
And when Marco's autopsy report goes public in the days after his death, the rumors will only become even more explosive.
According to the medical examiner's report from Jackson, he was also beaten and burned. We're getting a tremendous amount of insight from what's inside these documents.
Been coroner now for 28 years. I have never had as much publicity on a case as I did on this one.
For the underrepresented communities Marco McMillan was trying to serve, his loss is unimaginable.
Marco measured impact by people and their response and them feeling his heart. And what I know for sure is that Marco had gained the morale of the people, the trust of the people. He spent hours sitting at tables, kitchen tables, dinner tables, illuminating the minds of the way people think. That is one of the most powerful things you can do.
Despite the rumors circulating throughout the city, law enforcement in Clarksdale remains tight-lipped about Marco's murder. On May 1st, 2013, Marco's mother, Patricia, sends a letter to the sheriff demanding answers. That same day, the district attorney approves the release of Marco's autopsy and toxicology results. The report confirms Marco had small amounts of alcohol and marijuana in his system, but neither contributed to his death. It's the list of extensive wounds that draws the most attention throughout Clarksdale.
The body was pretty badly damaged. Part of that was from the burning, part of that was from the dragging, part of that was from the barbed wire. You drag a body through anything, obviously, you're gonna have scratches and contusions, things like that.
To many in Clarksdale's black community, the autopsy report raises even more questions than it answers. While some are still convinced it's a hate crime, others speculate that, whether hate played a role or not, Reed must have had some help to do what he did to Marco, whatever his motive may have been.
There's somebody else out there. There's somebody else a part of it. They're not being punished for what they did.
But investigators on the case believe Reed was so amped up after the murder, it's possible that he summoned the strength to drag Marco on his own.
I think the guy's adrenaline was going so that it didn't matter how big it was. Unless somebody just gets to where they can't live with it and comes up and says, I did help drag him or whatever. But I don't think that'll ever happen.
The rumors of more than one killer led some in the community to suspect that Reed may have targeted Marco because he was being paid to do so.
That's where the notion came in, okay, that this murder was political. I mean, was he killed because he was running for mayor? You had two politicians vying for the position. So therefore, both of them were highly motivated, and one of them ended up dead. So that kind of cast a dark light on the community as to what happened to Marco.
One pervasive story was that a powerful Clarksdale attorney and entrepreneur named Bill Luckett, who was also running for mayor, must have directed Reed to kill Marco. But many were quick to dismiss the rumor.
Bill Luckett was also legitimately very popular in his own right, and popular among a broad swath of people, from white folks, African Americans, and heck, for that matter, the first gay wedding in Clarksdale was at Bill Luckett's Ground Zero Blues Club. No one who knew Bill Luckett would honestly believe that Bill Luckett would have someone murdered, because yes, he was super rich, but I mean, he wasn't evil.
Others speculated that Marco's other opponent, Chuck Espy, must have somehow been involved. But that rumor, too, was quickly dispelled.
Espy was coming in there, gonna go for it, and he's been a state representative. His dad's been our mayor several terms, and neither one of them would have done anything like that. I think it's just the timing of everything, and I think it's the way the community got it out there, you know.
But for some of Marco's staunchest supporters, they still aren't convinced it wasn't political, and that Reed was simply acting on behalf of someone who feared Marco's inquest into Clarksdale's finances.
Marco was prophetic in his thoughts and foresights. He told me that if something happens to me, I want you to know is this campaign. He said these demons are coming out of the woodworks. They don't want me to shed a light on corruption and what's going on in this city. So he said, if you hear that something has happened to me, it's the campaign. It's the campaign. One of my regrets was I did not dig into it. I should have took what Marco told me seriously. Who are you referring to? Give me more context so I can go off of it.
But authorities find no actual evidence of any sort of conspiracy.
They were saying, what are y'all covering up? You know, why are y'all covering this death up? And I said, nobody's covering up nothing. I said, you can look at anything I got, you know. And I said, you can go to the crime lab. We'll go down there. We'll look at everything you want to. Nobody's covering up nothing.
That still doesn't stop the story from gaining national attention, only feeding the rumors on a much larger scale.
I was called by the Current Affairs TV show. I was interviewed by Atlanta, Georgia Constitution, New York Times, Washington Post. They all came to my office.
The national media outlets reported that it was a racial crime, that it was a homophobic crime, politically motivated. And I think that's human nature, not just because it's a small town. A black gay political candidate gets murdered. I mean, you're going to draw conclusions like that.
Despite all the different theories taking on a life of their own in Clarksdale and beyond, Marco's family must focus on the reality of punishing the man responsible for his murder. They want to make sure that no matter what stories he told to police, Lawrence Reed doesn't escape justice for what he did to Marco.
It's one thing to kill somebody in self-defense. It's another thing to kill somebody, steal their vehicle, try to burn their body, then run and hide.
March 2015, 2 years after the brutal murder of mayoral candidate Marco McMillan, his confessed killer, Lawrence Reed, finally stands trial.
It wasn't a terribly big courtroom. It was an older courtroom, so little, wood floors, that sort of thing, wooden benches for the audience. The Reed family was there, and it was hard on them, you could tell. They held out hope, I think, that somehow Reed would, if not get off, then at least get a light sentence.
But the prosecution has a different outcome in mind. Despite his claims of a sexual assault, the state argues that Reed had plenty of opportunities to simply walk away, or that he could have called police to report the crime after the fact. Instead, he strangled Marco to death and mutilated his body to cover up the crime.
Lawrence Reed said Mark McMillan made a pass at him and tried to get physical with him. But the state was always very firm, of course, that doesn't justify murder. Reed could have left the vehicle, or he could have called the police immediately. There was always options.
The state has no obligation to prove Reed's true motive, and they largely avoid the subject altogether. All they need to prove is that Reed murdered Marco, plain and simple.
You can't plead self-defense. If you kill someone, steal their car, snag their body, and try to burn their body.
As for the conspiracy theories that have taken on a life of their own, the district attorney avoids talk about those as well, since that's all they seem to be, just theories.
You say to yourself, there must have been a setup, somebody must kill him, but the law in the investigation didn't bear that out.
It was just this horrible, sad, unfortunate story about somebody who overreacted at a sexual assault, did the absolute wrong thing, and continued to do the absolute wrong thing until he was arrested.
But Marco's family and friends insist he would never sexually assault anyone, and that Reed is simply trying to make himself out to be the victim.
I will say, Marco, never in 1,000 years. And I'll leave it at that, never in 1,000 years.
To everyone's surprise, Reed decides to take the stand in his own defense. He sticks to his original story.
He was in tears. He seemed like he was reliving it in real time. I mean, he was not enjoying himself being up there. I did not get the sense it was premeditated in the slightest. I believe his story that he got freaked out and that maybe he was sexually assaulted and he responded in the worst way imaginable. But I never got the impression that he was motivated by hate, motivated by bias or malice or any kind of bigoted sentiment.
Reed doesn't hold up well under cross-examination, however.
The old adage is true, you shouldn't take the stand in your own defense. Our district attorney, she did not go easy on him. My goodness, I hope I never cross-examined by her, because it was an evisceration.
On March 12th, 2015, the jury finds Lawrence Reed guilty of murder.
There was an emotional reaction from the Reed family, because again, they didn't want to see their kid locked up for years and years and years. But the McMillan family was, as you would expect, relieved.
Justice has been done, and we're prepared to move forward in the memory and legacy of Marco.
Reed is sentenced to life in prison without parole.
The death penalty is legal in Mississippi, but they don't typically go after it for various political reasons.
As far as the state is concerned, justice has been served. But for many, questions still linger, and Marco's death will never make sense, and it may never have closure.
Time and time again, you see the lack of justice for Black people, and not just in Mississippi, but around the country. It just causes in our psyche, as just human beings, that we question the system. So when I look at it from the legal standpoint, is there a lot of questions? Yes. Is there a lot of gaps? I believe in the case. Yes. Do I trust the justice system 100%? No. Marco brought about public attention to what he believed to be, waste, fraud, abuse, misuse of funding. Now, did he have evidence? I don't know. Was people nervous around the town? The chatter when I was on the ground talking to people at the crossroads at Clarksdale? Yes.
You're on this political stage, you got higher ambitions, and there's always something happening in shark-infested waters.
He was going to bring forth a new era, a new generation of leaders here in Coleman County. So therefore, Marco was a threat to somebody, somehow, some form, some fashion. So therefore, it's still a question mark there, and it's going to forever be a question mark.
My hope is that if there is unsolved mysteries and gaps that people know about, they will speak up about that. They will shine a light on that, so we won't have to ever experience another Marco McMillan.
Marco's death prevented him from pursuing the changes he dreamed of, but the effect he had on the people of Clarksdale lives on.
I think it changed the dynamics in the city at that time. It changed the hope, the dream of people in the community. You know, they became more adamant about having a black mayor. I think sometimes martyrs change communities for life.
He made a significant impact here. We just need 100 more like Marco. Yeah.
The vision he had for Clarksdale is still coming true today. And I believe that his life is not in vain. His life was dedicated to changing things in Clarksdale. It did. It did.